I own the video, but they would own the music, so I'd have to get permission, and
Go through your office or theirs? I'm going to give it a shot.
I don't doubt the Doors would allow it. I don't know why. It just such a quagmire.
Okay, we're on.
Thank you. Along the way, I got to interview Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, and then Jim Morrison, and they all had the same one thing in common.
You're plague. I'm getting out of here.
I made it. I made it. It seemed as though they were from some other place. They weren't quite. They were not
definitely
in step with the rest of us.
I found that particularly true of Hendrix. I was always a fan. Like 8 years old, I owned his records, and he always just seemed to be visiting.
But you weren't a Doors fan.
No. Nor was I a Janis Joplin fan until I was living in New York and I saw a documentary on her, because I'd never seen her on stage, and then I literally grabbed the television. She was so powerful and fresh.
You approached, or all of you, and you apparently talked about this project as early as 1986.
Not me, but my only involvement, which had nothing to do with the long history of getting it on the screen, but people through the years gave me a book about him. And I collect books. I love reading, and I always threw it out. I looked at the cover, and
You weren't interested.
I think probably there was something. I was probably jealous. I thought a guy who looks like that and sings like that and did whatever he wanted, how could he be any good?
When you got live on stage, and you started doing Morrison, the performer, did you then get a better sense of what it was that maybe even drove him away from the audiences? That love-hate relationship?
That I understood before I went on stage. I mean, stage is my passion, so I did Hamlet a couple of years ago, and inside the character, who's able in such almost divine way, the words are so extraordinary, but he's challenging the audience. You pigs, you sheep, what are you? And Shakespeare was venting a lot of his frustration as an artist through this character, why he's so dynamic. So I understood things about that.
You understand fame, obviously. Jim seemed to not be a person ready or willing to accept what fame brought him.
Yeah, I think as much as that he was perhaps super aware, hyper aware of media, his time, very sensitive. And so media was a new form that youth had access to for the first time, getting on Ed Sullivan. And
he knew how to use that media, didn't he?
Right. So I think it had more to do with the consequences of his knowledge, very active knowledge that you are what you eat. You can make what you want.
He embraced fame, though, I think, and I especially liked the scenes of the whiskey. That was fresh, that was new, that was a band that was...
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah.
I thought the whole sequence of the end worked very well.
Yeah. Jim saw himself as this tragic poet, and do you agree with the thought that perhaps this whole long thing that we saw flash in front of us was a sort of a last will and testament?
Definitely. I think if you could categorize his interest, that he was active about it. I mean, he loved film, but he didn't do much with it. But writing, which is his first, I think, and music, and then his own life as a poem. I think he was best at his life, as good as the songs are and some of the poetry.
Do you think you'll be able to, have you thought this through about you know how the Morrison and those who worship Morrison in particular, can you now wash yourself of the character?
Yeah, I mean, I just took a shower after the movie and kicked those leathers out the door.
Will you ever wear leathers again?
Not unless I surf. Yeah, I feel like a wetsuit.
It's interesting that Morrison was always one talking about chaos and breaking through and disorder, and yet it seems as though the people doing the breaking and the disorder never reap the benefits. It's always someone who follows later.
Yeah, I think that depends. I mean, Lenin, the Russian one, managed to, but didn't last too long. I mean, I don't know what... he definitely was living on the edge, and part of the challenge that I faced personally was it made me more healthy, because he was saying, well, he did it full out, and that side of his life in the 60s is a tremendous value.
Did he believe in God?
I think so. He was also a true philosopher. He had an amazing brain, and I think just in that last year he was starting to get over. It's easier to want truth than to get rid of the error that you know you have. And I think he was just getting willing to do that. And then the body's, every day he tried in some way to meet death, and finally said, okay, shook his hand, let's go.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.